Debt is a leverage, is something that you saw in the previous presentation. I will skip that. But how is compliance with program conditions assessed? Most IMF loans feature phased disbursement. The disbursements are phased. This allows the IMF to verify that the country is continuing to adhere to its commitments before disbursing successive installments. Program monitoring relies on several different tools. IMF lending has involved policy conditions since the 1950s. Up to the early 80s, IMF conditionality largely focused on macroeconomic policies. Subsequently, however, the complexity and scope of the structural conditions attached to IMF loans increased significantly. This broadening and deepening of conditionality reflected in part the IMF's growing involvement in low-income and transition countries, where structural problems hampering broader economic stability and growth were particularly severe. And I'm reading from the IMF itself. In 2002, the IMF concluded an extensive review of conditionality, a consultative process including public involvement aimed at enhancing the effectiveness of fund-supported programs. This review recognized that successful economic policy programs must be founded on strong country ownership. Accordingly, the IMF has been striving to focus more sharply and be more clear about the conditions attached to its financing and to be flexible and responsive in discussing alternative policies. Now, this is from IMF itself, but all this failed during the Southeast Asian crisis, financial crisis, which was spurred actually by IMF itself. These are the ways the IFIs have drafted themselves in cohering both institutionally and in their policies, which is basically, as Wallerstein as quoted him, is to pave way for essentially a US domination and their corporations in the global economic sphere. But as has been mentioned, there are movements all over the world fighting this, and one of the major movements in that is the movement against IFIs, which is a global movement fighting them together. And in September 2006, that's 1 year ago, it produced a document on IFIs, and I have some extracts from that document as what is the view of the people to this coherence of policies of IFIs. And I will just read two extracts from this. Stop IFI funding and involvement in environmentally destructive projects beginning with big dams, oil, gas and mining, and implement the major recommendation of the Extractive Industries Review. The international financial institutions are also presenting themselves as leading in the fight against climate change and environmental destruction. However, no amount of clever rhetoric about stronger commitments and new strategies can hide the fact that many projects designed, driven and supported by international financial institutions violate the already watered down standards and safeguards avowed by these same institutions and cause massive environmental as well as social problems. The World Bank is itself a major ecological debtor, having funded major projects such as hydroelectric dams, mines, pipelines and petroleum exploration, and development projects which have displaced populations and wrought major environmental damage. The World Bank has refused to implement major recommendations of its own Extractive Industries Review, including the principle that communities faced with resource extraction projects must give free, prior and informed consent, and the phase out of investment in hydrocarbon extraction projects. The World Bank's attempt to claim leadership on the issue of climate change with the application of its development of carbon credit trading is another tragic example of market fundamentalism. Entrusting the precarious future of the world's climate to the World Bank's clever market solutions distracts the major actors from focusing on the overconsumption that threatens to doom the planet and all who live on it. Meanwhile, the World Bank Group, which claims leadership in developing alternate energy, devotes much greater resources to developing conventional energy resources. Indeed, the World Bank is the world's leading financer of projects producing greenhouse gases. And the last one, immediately stop imposing conditions that exacerbate health crises like the AIDS, which we heard yesterday, and make restitution for past practices such as requiring user fees for public education and healthcare services. IFI policies have aggravated health crises like the AIDS pandemic in a number of ways. Austerity measures have constrained health budgets, prevented the hiring of critically needed teachers and healthcare workers due to limits on spending for public sector employees, and kept people out of clinics and children away from schools by insisting on user fees. The macroeconomic policies the IFIs have imposed over the last 25 years, including fiscal austerity, high interest rates, unilateral trade liberalization,